Hi, everyone. Mark DeJesus here. This is your brother from another mother bringing you a broadcast to address some questions in some areas that I think could be a benefit to a lot of us that are navigating the healing and freedom journey. As you may know, I'm very passionate about helping believers to be equipped in mental, emotional, and relationship health. And I think that encompasses so much of our lives, doesn't it? And many of the questions you're asking are bringing out deep battles and struggles. And I think one of the things that I want to mention is a lot of the questions that come in reveal that you may feel like you're alone in your battle, but there are many others going through the very same thing. I remember in scripture where I believe it's Peter, he talks about this process of suffering that people can go through and struggle. And suffering can certainly be brought out in a lot of different areas, but one of the things that he mentioned is he said, because a lot of those all around the world basically are going through similar things. And I think that there's a battle and struggle that we have in our journey that I'm the only one struggling with this, which then leads us to something's wrong with me. And then we spiral and we spin, right? What I'm going to talk about today, I'm not even sure at this point in the recording what I'm going to name this video. And usually you have some kind of like name, like I'm going to talk about, but it's going to have something to do with when there's transition in church, someone's leaving, you're leaving, there's moving on happening, and the struggle of finding heartfelt, connected community. When that transition doesn't go well, when it does go well, but then there's also this cry of believers that are like, man, I want to be able to connect with others and be able to process this, but you run into some obstacles along the way. And some of those obstacles are going to be expressed here in high resolution. So without any further delay, let me get into these questions and remind you that, actually, a little slight delay to mention, if you like the materials, go to markdejesus.com. I got a topics page. I've spent a lot of time putting these different topics together. There's books, courses, resources, and please consider subscribing, but also consider a one-time donation or a regular support, and that helps make a lot of this all that more possible. We greatly appreciate that. So now I really mean it without further delay. So here's the question. This isn't an OCD or mental health question, more of a what is normal question. Now, I will say this does get into mental health stuff, which she acknowledges at the end of it. It's okay. It's okay if you can't get to it for a while, but I'm curious to know what you think. I've had the experience quite a lot at different churches over the years where I make friends with someone at church and they attend for as long as they feel like their needs are being met. But before very long, they're on to the next thing. I myself to be someone who stays in it for the long haul, so this always feels a bit disappointing. Now, in my journey of pastoring, I pastored in a church that I would say it was on the larger size. It was at the time moving towards about 1,500 people. We had a pretty substantial, large pastoral staff. I also have a lot of experience in a small level, pastoring a very small church and teaching, preaching, and dealing with the ins and outs at that kind of level. And there is this pattern where there are people that tend to go from one church to the next. We would call them church hoppers. And I would often judge them. They would annoy me. They're very frustrating. And I would have a sense of allegiance to here's where I am and I'm planted and I stay, firmly. And these people are flaky. And now that I've had a lot of experience and gone through a lot of experiences that have humbled me in my own journey, I look at people differently because there's not a cookie cutter reason why people move on from a church or have to move on, or even people who tend to bounce, because I actually have a lot of compassion on people that bounce because there is this longing within them that goes back to their broken history of not feeling like they belong. They feel odd. They're very hungry. And yet, they might be a little quirky or whatever, but they're passionate about looking for greater healing and freedom. And so it's caused me to be less judgmental across the board. And I really want to invite us to look at these changes in life, more graciously. And I'm not saying this writer isn't. It's just kind of something that comes to mind for me that God's, I feel like, worked on in my own life, in my own journey, because I feel like it can be detrimental to think as a church, you're a part of this, get on board, you need to be on board for the long haul. I realized this very, very clearly when I pastored a small church. Many people attended my church for a season, and I recognized there was something we teach and emphasize that they need for their life and journey. And there came a time where that season was ending, and they were shifting in what their emphasis was. And I really tried to be like, hey, that's awesome that you're headed in that direction. It didn't always work out that way. Sometimes departures are just really tough. They're just really challenging. They are. I have a lot of compassion for the people transitioning. I have compassion for the leaders. It's very, very difficult, but I do think we need to have a big picture when it comes to the body of Christ, because we tend to be like very church loyal to the specific church that we attend. This church is great, rah, 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 we're awesome. Then that can start to make it like our place is better than the other places, and you can develop a real bubble environment. When I left the first church that I served at back in 2006, I grew up in that church. So I was there for a total of about 22 years, maybe, around that. That's a lot of history. That's a lot of relationship development. That's a lot of change. And I found that the departure was harder than I ever understood. If you leave in a good way, if you leave in a bad way, it's still very challenging. And I think a lot of believers try to leave in a good way. That's a whole subject in itself. But I think that we sometimes lose the big picture in sight of what God's doing in somebody's life, that they may be there for a season. And I think it is frustrating where pastors are trying to cultivate long-term relationships. But we also don't recognize seasons, where someone's season is changing. And I feel like that creates a lot of problems. And then when someone leaves the church, it's like good against evil. Like, we're the good guys, you're the bad guy. And I think that that's a dangerous thing, because pastors can learn when people leave, hey, did we handle that well? Maybe we can improve on that in the future. Maybe that we can grow and learn. It's like, no, that person's Jezebel, that person's deceived. It's like this very black and white kind of stance that gets taken. And then people who leave can tend to look at churches or ministries they leave with that lens too. They're just all bad, pure evil, right? And I think part of the healing journey is like, it's not just that. It's like, hey, I got some great things there, and it was good, but there was some concerns, and maybe that's what made me move on. I'm in a new season now, and that's okay. And otherwise, we get lost in stuff that gets us very, very unhealthy. And I found there was a season of my life I did some church consulting kind of work, and I found there was a constant pattern of people leaving, and it was treated in that like good guys, bad guys. And it wasn't that simple. And there was some recognition on both ends that could have really used some healing and some help. But because these are very sensitive issues, we get like our dukes up, we start fight, and we lose sight, and strife kicks up. And you may think that, hey, that person was so wrong in what they did in leaving the church. But if you keep contributing to the strife, we're giving the enemy a huge ground in this. So I hope I'm making sense. Let me stay back and focus on the question here. Anyway, most of the time, the person or family leaves on amicable terms, at least amicable with me. And they promise that this isn't the end of our friendship, that they will stay in touch, even though they are now going to a different church. I'm finding that this rarely, if ever, actually happens, though. Yes, this is a common pattern. It happens in a lot of ways, that when you attend a church, like that becomes your world, that becomes like your bubble, and it's hard to see outside of that. Some churches really contribute to that. It's like if you're attending one church, but there's a ministry somewhere else that you really feel passionate about, and you're involved in that. It's like, you're not fully on board here. And I over the years, I don't really think that's a healthy response to have. And we need to have the big picture in mind of what God is doing in people's lives. And some God sends into your life for a long term, some they're for seasons. And so I found too, I even found in people saying, yeah, like that person left, we're not allowed to talk to them. And it was like, why? It's like, well, because it gets weird if they leave and then you talk to them. And there's a lot of real control issues that can develop that contribute to this. I'll continue. They almost never stay in touch. And it is usually at the end of the friendship, it kind of just slowly dies from there. I'm sure they had good intentions, and I don't take it as anything personal against me, but it is saddening. I know people are limited in how big of a circle of friends they can connect with, and maybe expecting them to stay friends with anyone outside of their church is expecting too much. Sometimes it can be, because we get, especially when people are heavily involved in a church, they invest so much in it. It's all you really see. They can't see anything outside of that. I was wondering what your experience is. Well, I'm definitely sharing that. Are you able to remain friends with people even when they no longer attend your church? I find it very difficult. And I've been on every end of I've been the pastor, I've been the attendee. I feel it, it doesn't happen very well. I want to be able to do that. But it becomes like a wall comes through, unfortunately. Do you find that the people whose lives you pour into locally in person are mostly limited to wherever you go on Sunday mornings, or are you able to make good connections beyond that? Well, one of the reasons why I moved from pastoring a local church into what I'm doing now is because it was very evident that I was moving into many different levels of influence in different streams of Christianity and faith and all the spectrum of denominations and so forth, that my heart was to bring healing and freedom and that kind of mindset of the love of God and mental health, emotional health, and healing of relationships. That's our core passion. So that brought me into a broader scale, and it really helped me to see the body of Christ at large differently and to actually appreciate different aspects of streams, where the different streams actually, they do a lot of yelling at each other and who's right and who's wrong. And there's a lot that I can appreciate from within the body of Christ. And so my mindset sees beyond and even beyond what can you do for me and what can you do for my ministry. And I feel that there's a very unhealthy pattern of churches and ministries of we're looking with a vortex of suction, who can work with me and be with me, rather than organically letting God bring those relationships in. And when they move on, being good at letting that go, even though it's painful. We don't know how to recognize, okay, someone's moving on and it's okay. Or recognizing this isn't working out and that's all right. And okay, I feel like I'm forcing this relationship and I can let it be and it's all right. No judgment. And there's been certain relationships, even to this day, where I go, what happened? What happened? I'm trying to contact, I get no answer, and I'm left with, okay, God, unless something clear is brought to mind, I've got to just let it be, because otherwise my mental health is going to suffer a lot, and I'm going to spend a lot of time spinning and obsessing over something. So I feel that my journey has been having a grounded perspective on situations, to not make people, oh, they're the devil, they're the enemy. Now, I've had a lot of people who've had, in my opinion, the devil working through them to create division and all this stuff. I still want my healing journey to see it from a greater perspective than just good guy, bad guy. We all have areas that we can work on and grow in. And so in my first church that I served at, the bigger church, there was definitely because when you're in the big machine of church growth, you got to get volunteers and you got to make sure they're on board, and you're constantly in that world, when I had the smaller church, I really tried to be in a place of, and I started to actually appreciate the small. I really did. I think sometimes when it comes to certain things, smaller the better, because you have these meaningful interactions that take place. And I feel like the beauty of what God can do in that can be so powerful and so meaningful. And so I hope I can, and so I have a privilege of being able to feed into somebody, and I don't need to go, is this person on board with me or whatever? It's like I'm there to equip. And even in my coaching work, my desire is not to like try to maintain this person, for sessions. It's like when they feel like they're moving on, or they feel like they've gotten what they need, I'm sensitive to that. I'm like, right on. That's awesome. And I've now got this brother or sister in my life I'll always remember. And I may bump into you in life, or maybe I'll see you in heaven and we just high five because of the blessing I was able to be in your life, or whatever God used. And I think that bigger picture is healthy. That's just my opinion. So you said maybe being in the kind of ministry you work in, your situation is probably a little different than the average churchgoer. But okay, so let me go back to the little church. There was a struggle, though, that when people would come and I would invest in them, because here's the thing that happens. When you do heart healing work, or even when you start to bring people in closer to be on mission together or do life together, the brokenness does come to the surface. It does rise to the surface. And we have a decision. We really do. The proximity of coming closer brings it out. And it was heartbreaking. There were a lot of people that moved on just when we were like starting to have some great breakthrough. That was difficult for me to process through. And at times it would inflame obsessiveness, where I would spin about the person. And then I'd feel like, well, maybe we need another meeting. And it took time to learning to release people, learning to let them go in those because I'd like, man, we made an investment. We did this for so long. And now this change is happening. So Melissa and I've definitely had to grieve that part of it. And it's painful, but you find peace, you find grace in learning to release people and not have this black and white mindset of we are the good guys, they're the bad guys. It's recognizing now you may need to move on because someone's toxic. You may right, but you then appreciate there were some good things that we had there. There was some good stuff, and I can grieve that without it being a bitter thing, and that's some of what I can say about that. That maybe could give you some feedback. I guess I'm really just lonely when it comes down to it. I thought of this when I heard you tell the story of when you were at the church and you said, "Who's with me?" and no one stood up. That's referring back to the message. I think it's in the book, God Loves Me and I Love Myself. I forget where I write things sometimes, where I was giving a message exhorting the men and really talking about activating their who they are as men of God and stepping up. And I did this thing about raising my hand, and it just organically in the moment, said, "Who's with me?" And I stood there in silence, and I just let the silence hang. I don't know. There's something about me that I was like, okay, I put it all on the line. No one stood, and I just stood there, and I just let it hang there. And then Melissa and I shared about this, where there was crying amongst the wives and ladies in the congregation. Some anger going on. There were some wives that were like, the ride home in the car ain't going to be great, kind of thing. But then it shifted into compassion, where they just start praying for the hearts of men. And actually in the service, one by one, many of the ladies just started praying. I stood there in the silence, and I just let the silence hit. Sometimes we're afraid of those silent moments in church. Pentecostals can be terrible at that. They can't stand a moment of silence. They got to fill every moment, right? With a lot of repetitive words, and worst case scenario, they go, give God a praise, give God a praise. And it's like, I'm uncomfortable with silence. So in that moment, I just let the silence hit. And in that darkness, God actually worked because the ladies in the congregation then prayed out loud, one by one. They just started praying and praying for the hearts of men. And so I walked out that day with a very sober awareness that what I was moving into wasn't going to be like just tons of people just getting on board, at least at that stage. And I made a decision to go after heart healing, and I recognized the church was very, very broken. I've seen behind the scenes in ways that I cannot unsee what I've seen. And so it's given me a vantage point of seeing how things work and seeing the broken patterns we live in. And basically what we're doing is we're lost in all these missions and things, and we're not dealing with our brokenness. And our brokenness impacts how we're acting in every moment. And we're not aware of it. And so it's creating problems in how we relate to each other. And so I stepped into that going, God, I'll do it, right? And I even remember hearing somebody preach about, you willing to go for it? Are you willing to bring, I can't remember if the pastor said it or if there's something I felt in my heart when I was sitting at this service, but it was this thought of, are you willing to help bring healing to hearts, even though in their brokenness, many of those hearts will attack you? That was the thought. And I was like, yes, God, I'll do it. You can have those moments, right? And then the reality of that set in. And I had to learn how to deal with that. I had to learn how to grow through that. I had to learn to let that place be a place where God could meet me in incredible areas. And because I always felt like, as I experienced the Father's love and I started to experience heart healing, and it started to impact my mental health, and I started to shift my relationship, and I started to see little increments of change. Here was my conclusion. My conclusion was, who wouldn't want this? Right? And I realized that there was a very big wall and a very big resistance of like, we ain't going there. That's too much work. That's too deep. And then there was all these cliches that met me. We don't need to deal about the past. It's under the blood. We don't need to be fussing over that. Jesus paid it all. So we don't, all these things that was like protective mechanisms to not allow people to just deal with the fact that we're broken people with a journey that God is needing to be invited to at that deeper level of allowing him to bring the healing and transformation to these areas of our hearts that have been unloved and have been traumatized, because our relational grid affects everything. I could go on and on about that, but I thought everybody would want that. So I would have these moments where I would share my testimony, and people would come to me like privately. They were like ashamed publicly. So like you'll have these moments where people are like, oh yeah, that's great. And you're like, are people getting this? Or they, and then privately they're like, yeah, I really relate to what you shared here. There's a lot of shame covering the battles that people had, basically. And so I'd have people pull me aside in the hallways and things like that. Church service, like, can you pray with me? And I started to see families going, I got that anxiety really bad that you're talking about. It's really bad. I don't know what to do. And my kid's starting to show signs of it. And I'm like, wait a second. Families are really struggling with a lot of stuff. And here's what they're really battling, but here's what we're preaching on Sundays. Are we really bringing the word of God in a way that's helping these battles? This is the day-to-day stuff people are going through, their mental, emotional, relationship health. So then I had to realize, you have to be able to deal, when you have that overcoming heart of wanting healing and freedom, you'll have to learn how to process people that just don't want it. It's no judgment. Don't judge them, sentence them to something in your mind. It's like, it's all right. I'm kind of going for something. It doesn't mean I'm better than them at all. I'm just going for something that's important to me. You see, I value mental, emotional health. Every day of my life, I live in a way to treasure, to guard, to walk in the power of what overcoming, healing mental health can be. And I realize that people I bump into, they're not living in that. But I know what it's like to live in a place where I had no sanity, where I couldn't get through 30 seconds and have peace for 20 seconds or 30 seconds. I know what that torment is like 24/7. I know what it's like to be at prolonged days on a scale of 0 to 10, 10 being the worst and most intense. I know what it's like to live at a 10 for days and days and days, and it never seeming to budge. So the journey I've been on that's produced greater healing, greater freedom, greater peace, greater sense of groundedness and love. I treasure that. And I realize, hey, not everybody has my journey, but the body of Christ is suffering. And the percentages of mental health issues that we're seeing, and I would say that data is just people that are sharing and expressing and getting help so that that's recorded. There's so many more people struggling with these same issues, right? So you have to learn, if you're a heart healing overcomer kind of person, you'll have to realize not everybody's in it to win it. Not everybody is ready just yet. Not everybody is where you are. So this does a number of things. One, it makes us less judgmental about people if the relationship doesn't work out and connect. That's really what I try to live in. And two, it helps me to appreciate what I can have in a relationship interaction, because maybe someone's not where I'm at with stuff, but you know what? They're very loving and they're very kind. And I'm like, I can appreciate that in our interactions. And so I think that in friendship, especially people with obsessive tendencies or perfectionistic tendencies, you can hold a high standard and like no one fulfills it. And then you feel this loneliness. It's understandable, but I think it can be helpful for us to go, you know what? That person, when I interact with them, I can appreciate this about them. And that may be the area that you connect in. You may not be able to connect with them about these things over here, but you can connect on these areas and appreciate that. Now, I'm springboarding off of what's being shared here. I'm not saying the person writing this that you're carrying any of the problems that I'm talking about. So this is what you share here. Really, really hits my heart. What you shared here, this is the tough stuff, what I'm about to read. I guess I'm really just lonely when it comes down to it. I thought of this when I heard you tell the story of when you were at the church and you said, "Who's with me?" and no one stood up. Earlier this year, in my midweek small group, I took a risk to share just the tiniest little bit, maybe 2 or 3 sentences of what I was learning about heart healing and facing fears, just to see if it would resonate in the tiniest way with anyone else there. You could have heard a pin drop. This is a very common problem. And I actually had to get used to it because I realize I see this in family. I see this in friends. I see this in church settings. We all need this, but it's uncomfortable, right? When you get to heart stuff, first of all, shame hits everyone because when you go, "How's your heart?" They go into performance mode. "I don't read my Bible enough." They go into, "I had bad thoughts yesterday." They go shame, 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 all the way down that, right? And we have these pin drop moments. I'll continue. People coughed and shifted in their seats. And finally someone said, "Wow, that sounds pretty crazy. Sorry you have to deal with that." This shows people do not have, many, I'm not saying all, but so many people do not have a heart-connected sense of struggle and battle. We're shoving it away. So when someone shares, we're awkward. Because the reason people are unsafe in their response is because they're not working through their own journey. So your working on your heart confronts them not dealing with anything, so you get awkwardness. Because this should be the area where your 3 sentences open up more. And there will be times. So what I'm going to tell you is don't give up on that kind of sharing, but let it provide wisdom. There's times I've shared and I've walked away just spiraling because I got nothing. Where's my crickets? Hold on a second. Let me find my crickets. There it is. There's my crickets. I got to label these so I know. Right? Hey, everybody. God's doing some healing in my heart. I have anxiety issues. I'm going through a season of depression. Right? I have OCD. Even though many in the seats have these battles, marriage issues, marriage struggles, and it takes courage for someone to step up and go, I'm working on this. You're going to have moments where you get the crickets, but it's still worth it. And there are times, you see, there are a lot of believers that don't realize there's seasons where you're standing and it feels lonely. We've been used to like, oh, you have people around you, you have friends be around you. There are times where the overcomers, because what you're expressing is a heart of an overcomer. It's like you're rising up from the midst instead of just being just a church attender or someone's like, yeah, I'm a Christian. You want more, and your battles have pushed you to a place where you're like, I got to deal with it. And so you rise up, and there will be moments where you get nothing, and it's okay. It doesn't mean nothing happened. You planted seeds. It gets people thinking, and you can walk away. So I walk away learning, okay, there's moments where maybe I was sharing, like I was too compulsive, where I just like, I got to get these words out. I got to share it, right? And then if you don't beat yourself up, you can see this, right? I would spend too much time spinning. It's probably, I shouldn't have shared it. It's so stupid. It's like, no, I should. That was good what I shared, but maybe next time I'll just wait a little bit, be a little bit more patient. There is a principle of like, don't throw your pearls before swine. It doesn't mean the people in your small group are swine. It means these pearls, this treasure of what God's done in your life is so precious. Don't just toss it everywhere. There is a sense of treasuring what you have and knowing, is this a good place to share the pearls? Another analogy is Jesus when he sent the people out to just share the kingdom. He says, when you go there, your peace, if your peace is welcomed, let your peace land. He gave a supernatural picture to the peace. He says, let it fall. What does that mean? It's like, okay, we have an agreement to be in alignment with the peace of God. We're let it fall. He said, but if not, walk out of there, take your peace with you, and shake the dust off your feet. The analogy being, when they had a lot of dust, walking in sandals and, then taking your sandals off and all that. And where I live in the Carolinas is more like that clay mud. That's tough to shake off. That stuff is like, whew, it's like taking barnacles off of a ship when you're getting that mud off, right? He says, shake the dust off your feet. What's the dust off your feet? It's the contaminants that stick to us when we're around people that are toxic or don't want what we're trying to share. Jesus goes, just shake the dust off. That's not for you to carry. And for many times I carried it. And I've had to learn, shake it off. It's all right. It's all right. And to not just throw judgment. So the person that said, wow, sounds pretty crazy. Oh, they're just a Pharisee, maybe, but maybe not. Maybe they're just not ready for it because it's awkward. Emotions are awkward for a lot of Christians. Super awkward. The next one, this hit my heart. This hit my heart the most out of everything you wrote in this. You share then someone else made a joke. This is like, I'm glad I wasn't there. It would have been like, Jesus is about to explode. Hulk, get angry. Then someone made a joke about how all she needs to face fear is lorazepam. Oh. Okay. And then she wrote here, insert major eye roll in here. Right? So you get the dull, weird response and then the joke. It's because people are uncomfortable with this. And so I decided I'm going to live my life, and I broadcast videos online. I share. My journey is out there. I've understood. I will get. And I'm learning in my journey. It's okay. That doesn't have to mean anything. And coming from OCD, those of you who struggle with that, you know what I'm talking about. That's a tough battle, your interpretation. Because I would interpret I'm missing God, doing something wrong. Stay in it. Be gracious and loving to yourself. Be gracious and loving to how you interpret this. Because if I was in that group, I'd probably be like, I'd be tempted to be like, y'all need some help. Because it is where they're like, their discomfort, they're throwing it at you. But I would also share with you, it's amazing you shared. And thank you for taking that step. Because that's, you walk away strengthened to not walk in shame owning your life. You know what? I'm going to continue my journey and I'm going to continue growing and continue healing. So you share here in that group, back to the group. Then the discussion moved on to other topics, right? Like they changed the subject. Quickly move on, move away. Welcome to my world. This wasn't an isolated experience either. This is something that, just like it has happened with other groups of people I've been in, or even just with people in one-on-one interactions. No one seems to have the slightest clue what I'm talking about. Dead stare. You're not crazy. This is a common problem. The church is in a place where, as a big perspective, is still in a place to recognize Isaiah 61 of all of our needs of healing of the broken heart. We still attribute that to, oh, that person over there that struggles. That's why I brought the Gospel and Heart Healing series that I did, to bring out this emphasis of what Jesus brought to heal broken hearts. Because our marriages are suffering, parenting is suffering, our kids, mental health battlegrounds are showing up in our kids. There's confusion, there's identity issues, there's temptations, addictions that people are battling with. But we kind of go through the mechanism of our day-to-day that doesn't show us how we can get to the heart of these battles and really heal and overcome. And so the church is very into building big, and I know I have the potential of being misunderstood, that I'm bashing the church. I'm not, but I'm saying the systems that we're promoting are eating us alive. It's promoting performance-driven Christianity, and it's making and leaving many to become burnt out and mentally unwell. And their marriages are suffering for it. And then we're just telling them, go and pray at the altar and God will help you. And we're not recognizing our rhythms, how many meetings we're having, our quest to go bigger and bigger. And we've lost sight of the beauty of small in the midst of it. And having these highly connected relationships, and then people raise their hand and go, hey, I'll make a call for us. Let's go deeper together. And you experience rejection. And so what I want to share with you is that I get it. I get it. But stay on your trail. Stay on where God's leading you, where you're headed, and keep moving forward. There will be times where God will cross paths with you. Two things. No, I'm going to say three. There are going to be people that cross your path in three categories. One, they're going to have something to deposit in your life. I'd be willing to receive that. Two, they're going to be people where you recognize this is an opportunity for you to be an encouragement of your story, what you've been through. And then three, it's not going to happen like all over the place. There will be people you bump into who like, you know what, there's a special exchange you can have here of mutual encouragement. Just stay in your path. Be open. God, I'm open. I'm open to opportunities. And he'll meet you. There might be some seasons where it feels lonely. Don't go into there's something wrong with me, all this stuff. Just take one step in front of the other. Be kind to yourself. And so you get into this loneliness thing here. It gets really tiring when no one is on the journey with you or even interested in learning more. I've listened to your series on loneliness. I found it really helpful and I would highly recommend it to everyone else, especially learning to minister to yourself. I am ministering to myself, and for the most part, that's been a great blessing, but I'm aware that eventually I'm going to come to the end of self-ministry being enough. Yeah, totally understood. There's only so far you can go in healing as a DIY project. Sooner or later, I really need some other people on this journey with me, and I'm afraid it'll never happen. So, biggest thing I can encourage you in there is let's not put the label on it'll never happen. Right now, you seem to be more on the more lonely side. You're making attempts, though, and you're struggling to see it happen. What I would say to you is let's not put any pressure on that, because beautiful relationships don't happen under pressure. We try to force connection. Beautiful relationships have an organic aspect about it that blossom. And then what blossoms, we do the work in cultivating it. But I feel a lot of times we force stuff and we never take a step back and go, So I get the premise you're in a season where you're learning to relate to yourself differently. And you're open and you want it. I think that's a beautiful place to be. So I got no judgment. Just stay open and continue to see what God does in that. For now, I'm just trying to tell myself that God will bring me those people or point me in the direction of where those people are when it's the right time. Does this sound reasonable? Yes, indeed. I'm not even sure what's reasonable anymore. So I'm looking for a second opinion. Well, hopefully you got it today. What do you know? I guess that was a mental health question after all. Sorry it was so long. Bet you never heard that before. Take care and stay out of the way of that rising creek. Thank you very much. The creek does seem like it's calming down, by the way. We've had about 5 pretty intense storms in the local water and local town, and even FEMA has come into Charlotte in some places. That's the federal, for those of you not in this country, that's the federal, federal government emergency that looks at areas that have been hit like by tornadoes or hurricanes, or in this case just severe weather at epic levels that hasn't been seen in this region for a long time. But we're doing okay. I think we're going to start settling into the rest of the summer without all that chaos going on. So let me get into one more question, if I could. Has this been helpful to you? Has this been a blessing to your life and your journey? If you feel like, wow, I need to dive into this. My series on loneliness, go to my topics page, go to loneliness, and certainly a recommendation. God loves me and love myself. I would encourage for your life and your journey. So there's this one's a tricky question. I'll address it, but let me just say up front, I would need a lot more information that I wouldn't have the time to even be able to take it and to dissect it. But I just, please understand, when I'm answering questions, I'm going off of what I'm reading, and I know it's more, there's more than meets the eye. But this is a question about leaving a church. And I want to just give some encouragement here. Hi, Mark. I've written to you before. I've bought your books and listened to your YouTube teachings. You've helped me so much. 18 months ago, when I had to break from a church that I had been attending for 18 years. That's a long time, by the way, 18 years in a church. So that's when you leave a church, it's almost more challenging than even like leaving or walking away from family members. because church has family, but also you've shared like the depths of your life. This isn't like, now, not always, you can be 18 years in a church and no one even knows anything about you. That was something I recognized as I became passionate about heart healing. I remember the first church I worked at where I saw, hundreds and hundreds of people on a weekly basis. I was like, wow, the amount of people I worked with, I know nothing about them. They could be having daily panic attacks. I wouldn't even know. Because my life was like, go, 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 next service, this thing, that. Hey, how's it going? Hey, good to see you, right? There was like a lure of community, but it wasn't community. In the sense of what I'm talking about, of like heart to heart. I got your back, walking with this together. When you have that kind of thing, it's very special. Anyway, let me get back to the point. 18 years. The church was low on love and high on commitment. Now, if that's the case, that's rough. Because low on love and high on commitment, there's going to be a lot of guilt. You need to get involved. You need to do this stuff. You need to, you don't do enough for God. Perfection and performance. So you said, I burnt out, but I went back. So here's a reflective question. Why did you go back? And many times it's because it was familiar. Be like, what? It's not for me. It's time to move on, but it's familiar. And we step out and we're like, wow, it's lonely. Leaving a church is lonely. Then you kind of like go back. It's just a question I bring up. But now I'm burnt out again and have left for good. The pastors have put on social media, I am deceived and backsliding. It hurts so much. How do I get through this? Now, this is where I don't have context, so I'm only going by what's happening here. I haven't seen the social media posts. I don't know what church you go to, so I'm going to go by what you're sharing here. Okay. Can we all keep that in mind here? It can be a pattern where when someone leaves, they become demonized. That we're the good guys, you're the bad guys. That goes into what some of the stuff I was sharing here at the beginning. And so I'm going to go with that. And you're in a place of hurt and pain. It sounds like you wanted to make it work, but it was an unhealthy environment. You had to get out. I do have a series that has been very, very helpful for people in some very difficult church situations. One of them is healing from spiritual abuse. It's on my course page. It's free. It's free. And it walks through stuff my wife and I share. There is deeper little videos that I put in there, and there's resources on books that you can read on that. I link to a bunch of other books that I've read through. I don't know, quite a packet of books on that subject, because it takes time to realize the church environment you're in is toxic. And then when you leave, that's a whole nother thing that takes perspective on it. So I'm going to share a couple things. Number one, you're in pain right now because you're being told you're deceived and backsliding, and there may be it can be common for pastors to do passive aggressive messages. So like someone leaves, they have a problem, so then they do a sermon, they don't really tell you the details, but they just kind of hammer away to defend their position and stuff. Whether or not that's right to do, you decide for yourself. And there's a couple things I would say. One is 18 years plus, because you went back, you leave. You have to give yourself the biggest amount of grace and kindness you've ever done in your life, because this is going to take time. And here's some temptations you're going to have under this kind of thing. You're going to feel the need to defend yourself. And if you do, I understand. I've done it. I've done it when I've been wrongly accused, or I have a wound that goes back to my childhood that God's healing, of being misunderstood. It's something I have to work through to this day, because I convey something and somebody comments and I'm like, I didn't mean that. And I have to actually go, oh, it's all right. I'm going to be misunderstood. Right. So beware of the need to defend yourself, that you got to get your story. No, that's not what happened, And there'll be those that that are safe, that you can process with for your healing. But also beware of your need to get people on your side And some people, like I began to fall in certain patterns where I saw this happen to me, where I was misunderstood. I felt the need to get the full story out, because I had this thing that like, well, if you heard what really happened, you change your perspective. And then I realized that's not always true. That's not always the case. Another thing I would share is the need to defend yourself, the need to get people on your side, right? Because it's like then it turns into this good guy, bad guy kind of scenario. And then that's how politics run. And you don't want to entangle with a political spirit. Politics are basically, we're the good guys, they're the bad guys. And here's the reason why, right? And a third thing I would share to consider is don't just rush into another fellowship. Now, I know that that's not a cookie cutter statement for everybody, but I noticed that people would leave an abusive situation that was very traumatic and then go like start a church. And I'm like, oh man, you need some space, you know? And I feel like I'm on the sidelines going, wait, no. You know, it's like you need time. I had this sense of like, because out of the pain of trauma, we can take that pain and the anger and then fuel it into like ministry or even church work or another church, right? And sometimes we just need a little time to settle. I'm thankful when I left that church in 2006, I was on staff on. My wife and I got married. We did a huge step. I wouldn't even recommend to people. We started all over. We were so passionate about this. We started from scratch. The ministry didn't take off. I had speaking things. I began exploring writing, which then I didn't even realize was going to become such a big part of my life. But I worked construction for a while. And I'm looking back, I'm grateful that it just didn't open up that way. That I had time to recalibrate, rediscover who I was. And actually, it gave me an opportunity to explore the body of Christ. I ran into some great people in ministry and got to see different streams and appreciate teachers and people just doing amazing stuff. So many times we rush into the next because of the pain of trauma and the loneliness. It's like out of that trauma, I find, go get therapy. Sit down with someone to process where that's where you're doing the work. Then I found in my journey, there were times where I went, you know what? I didn't always handle that thing I didn't think I handled that situation the best way either. Yeah, there's something I could learn. It's not a shame OCD, got to go fix it. It's just learning. And I think that's ultimately the healthy place when we've come out of trauma or even church abuse. It's like you look back at maybe the cult you were a part of and you're like, yeah, they're a cult. But you know what? There was some cool connections I had and there were some good things that took place there. And yes, what was wrong, right? It puts things in perspective so we can begin healing in a new way. And I'm not saying you have to grab that mindset as soon as you leave a place, but it's something that can develop over time. But I feel like we rush too much. When I had the small church and I taught a lot in healing and freedom, that was my emphasis, right? A lot. Sunday after Sunday, different aspects of things and people would be like, I want to leave my church. I want to come to your church. I would tell them, wait. I'd tell some of them who had families, sit for a Sunday and just be as a family and say, Sunday morning, we're going to sit down today. We're just going to have conversation. We're going to talk about things of God. How are we doing? We're going to have a good conversation and heal, right? That doesn't sound like something a pastor would say. Pastor, yeah, come, you're welcome here. We're going to have it just as because we got to feed the big machine. I don't know. I might have been that way in other church settings, but at least at that stage in my journey, I was like, no, I'd rather you be healthy. Just wait. And they'd look at me like, wait, what? No, we want to come. Just wait. And some would be like, nah, we don't want to wait. We'd start, and I would see the stuff bubble up, right? And I was like, this is what I was talking about. You need some time to decompress from the old. It's like someone who gets divorced and then goes into another relationship and gets married. It's like, whoa, we're not letting healing happen. You know, that's a big change. And we rush into the next step, to try to feel better, and we don't let the healing process happen. I pray today was a blessing to your life and your journey. Somebody needed to hear what I was going to share today. I was just myself and providing some feedback to questions, but maybe it'll help some people navigating some difficult seasons in their life. If this blessed you, let me know. Write to me at mark@markdejesus.com. If you can spell my name, you'll be able to email me. And if this was a blessing to your journey, consider supporting it financially, supporting it with prayer. Get a hold of our materials. It's greatly appreciated. But as I always say, Lord willing, and the creek don't rise, I'm going to do some more Q&A stuff because I got piles and piles of it, and I want to cut through some of it because there's some great stuff here before I get on to some other topics and broadcasts. My wife and I will be back with a part 2 of what we shared. Some other good stuff. So just keep an eye out for it. In the meantime, your brother's out.